This is the Everything Weight Loss podcast with Shari Ware, where we talk about everything, all things, anything to do with weight loss, health, and wellness. So today we're talking to Cody McAuliffe, who is a speaker who specialises in taking leaders and teams from force to flow. He does this by using the flow formula modality he created, which is based on testing people's epigenetic expression. This means that leaders can understand how their brains work differently to others to ultimately get into flow and become superhuman. I like the sound of that. Cody says, I see a world where everyone can become superhuman by unlocking their latent superhuman potential through flow. This is my passion, my purpose, and my mission in life. So first of all, Cody, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I know, I've had a few podcasts over the years, so I know the time, energy, and effort that goes into creating them. So thanks for sharing my audience with you and doing all of the work that you do to be able to curate and create this audience and this podcast. So it's an honor to be here.
I'm actually really excited because the flow formula just sounds awesome to me. But before we get into that, how did it all come about? Why do you do what you do?
Well, I first started out in my first coaching job would have been about 11 years ago now as a personal trainer, and I was in the fitness industry, and I had the thought process of, all right, well, I'm going to help people with their health and fitness, and it's going to be amazing. And it was to start. And then I realized that there was so much more to it, and that exercise and nutrition was just this tiny little part of it. So I started to shift beyond that. I ran the most profitable campus for the Australian Institute of Personal Trainers when I was a PT as well, because we're training all the other new personal trainers coming into the industry. I was a regional manager for international gym chain, all of these different things where I was working through all of the different growth things that you could go through in the fitness industry. And it really came to a head when I had this experience where I was basically just driving down the Gold Coast Highway, just up the road actually, at Tugun. And I had this experience where I came up to this set of traffic lights and I had tears streaming down my face. And I thought if I just drove out into traffic, I could, my car would be cleaned up by a truck, my life would be over, and most importantly, it wouldn't look like suicide, because I just couldn't do that to my family. And that was really a pivotal moment for me to be able to create that change, because I had all of the trappings of success. I was presenting all over the country. I was doing all of the things. I was making more money than I'd ever made before, and yet I wasn't fulfilled. And that was very much the starting point for me to be able to create this, what we call this superhuman society, where we can have all of our foundational needs met, so that we can come from our higher needs of growth and contribution to be able to live that life of fulfillment, because that was exactly what I was lacking in that instance. Even though I had all of the trappings of success, I still wasn't fulfilled. And that has become part of everything that I do, from all of the programs that I do, from all of the corporate work that I do, the certifications that I've created. Everything that I've created since then has been ultimately all about creating that superhuman society to be able to create a deep sense of fulfillment for every single person. So,
wow, that's a pretty scary place to be, and it's not where you would think that you would be. As you said, you had everything that anybody could want, and still you weren't. For me, when you said fulfilled, and that's obviously your word, but for me, what came into my head straight away was happy. So that's definitely a scary place to be. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I feel like, and forgive me or correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like the flow formula is, I ask all of my guests, if they were to have a superpower, what would their superpower be? So to me, it seems like it's the flow formula. Or do you have something else that's a superpower?
I think the flow formula is very much an expression of my superpower. And I think the superpower behind all of that is really just the ability to be able to see people for what their potential is, rather than for where they're currently at. And that skill has very much served me throughout my entire business. And it's very much a trainable skill to be able to start to see, well, this is where someone is right now. And if they just made these few little tweaks, if they worked through these few little areas in their life, then they'd have this exponential shift. They would go from being good to exceptional in what they're actually doing. And it's often just those small shifts that are inherently required for them to create that. And I think that is ultimately my superpower, and it's a superpower that I upskill other people on as well, to be able to create that, because it's ultimately a skill that's in need. It's very much needed in society right now, to start to see the possibility that there is out there, the potential that there is for people in every area of their lives, and having someone to hold them to account for that at the same time as well. So
I want to say, first of all, that that's an awesome superpower that is so valuable. And from personal experience, and I know that I'm not the only one, there's so many people, and there'll be a lot of people listening to this episode who have the same issue, is that they can't always see the potential in themselves. And so it sounds like that's where you come in. You can see that. And I love that you said it might just take a couple of little tweaks or shifts. See, so often we believe about ourselves that there's so much work that has to be done, and it seems so hard that we don't do it. So to have somebody come along and say, hey, you can do amazing things, and it's actually not going to take that much, that would be awesome. So tell us more about how you work with people, more about the flow formula, any things that you see people do that probably aren't the best things to be doing, and some things that they can do better. What comes out for you?
Yeah, definitely. And it flows on perfectly from what we were talking about before. It's whenever we're working with someone in a coaching capacity, what we're really doing as a coach and as the client is we're just highlighting blind spots. So if we're driving down the road, we can see certain things in the mirrors, and there's always going to be these blind spots that we're just completely oblivious that are really occurring. And as a coach, what we're really doing is we're just bringing that in to someone's awareness. We're going, okay, cool. This thing, you're driving here right now. There's something that's going on, and there's this back section of the car over here that you just need to be mindful of. Otherwise, you're going to crash into something, and there's going to be a big problem. So when we look at it based on that, it's just looking for what are the simple little things that most people are missing, so that we can highlight them to them and bring them into their awareness so they can focus on those things. And the most common one that we talk about when we first start working with someone is most people are doing the right thing just at the wrong time. And when we learn our epigenetic expression, we can understand what is the optimal time to be able to do things. What's the ultimate time to be able to exercise, to be able to eat, to be able to sell, to be able to connect with people, to be able to do interviews like this. For me, in the afternoon is the best time for me to be able to socialize. In the mornings, I'm very focused and driven, so I don't book any interviews, I don't book any sales calls. Then I focus on creating like IP or intellectual property around what we need to do, because that's going to create a long result from it. Whereas if we think about my partner, she has a completely different epigenetic expression, so she can do those calls in the morning, she can connect with people in the morning. And as soon as we understand the differences between us and what our greatest strengths are and what our greatest weaknesses are, we can actually start to collaborate and connect with people to be able to fulfill any gaps that we have, which becomes part of it. And that becomes the first thing that we look at any point in time is, number one, timing. And number two, looking at, okay, cool, what are your biological greatest strengths? What is your genius based on your biology? And as soon as we know that, we can allow people to start to step forward and create through that rather than fighting against it. Because it comes back to the Albert Einstein quote where he says, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its entire life believing that it is stupid. And we currently live in a society where we're all put into what this box is of normal. This is what normal is, and yet no one is actually normal.
Yeah.
So we live our entire life trying to fit into this box and change ourselves to be able to fit into this container. And yet that then negates our greatest strengths. It negates our greatest gifts that we're here to bring to the world because of this normal thing. And a great example of this is a personal example is based on how my brain works. It's very, I call it quantum because that's like empowering way to say it. It's insane. It just goes in all these different directions, all of these different things at all points in time. And that's really great for innovation. and everything else it's not so great for, because you're consistently connecting up all these dots of all of these different things, which is great for creating something new and innovating. And if you try and nail me down for a week on a specific task, even like 2 hours on a specific task, I just break free of that, because my brain doesn't like that. It doesn't work like that. I can focus for periods of time. And if I understand how that focus works for me, I can go, okay, cool. Well, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to do tasks which are going to create me being in alignment with how my brain functions, rather than trying to change it and go, okay, no, it needs to be like this, needs to be like this, needs to be like this. And part of it is just starting to understand, okay, cool. Well, what are my greatest strengths? And then as soon as we know that, how do I channel that through what I'm here to create in this lifetime? And that's what, when we're working with people, that's what we call what your calling is, what calls you forward, what calls you into your greatness. And it also becomes the way that you magnetize and attract people towards you by using it as your call to arms. And you will have heard me say that at the start. It's just like, well, I'm here to be able to create this superhuman society. This is a call to arms of people who resonate with that. It's a call to arms of people to go, all right, yep, I'm here to stand for that too. I'm here to stand for people having their foundational needs met so they can live from their higher needs of growth and contribution to live that life of deep fulfillment, or in your context, happiness. We can all rally behind how we communicate these things. And when we can start to communicate them more effectively and more succinctly, we can start to basically use it as a catch cry for people to be like, right, I'm on board with what you're here to create. I'm on board with the mission that you're here to live out in this lifetime. And it allows us to really, create what we're here to create in this lifetime. So.
Yeah. Okay. So you were talking about like your biological epigenetic expression. Is that part of the flow formula? Or is that something that's separate? You figure that out first, and then tell us more about that, how that all works together.
Yeah. Just to set a bit more context about epigenetic expressions, because most people don't necessarily know what that is when they're first finding out about it. So your epigenetic expression is basically just how your genes are expressing themselves. So that, like, we have two core different types of genes, which are on-off genes. So you can turn a gene on or turn it off, or a dimmer switch where it turns it up or down.
Oh, okay.
So when we think about that, we have a specific amount of genes, about 26,000 genes that are in our DNA. They can be turned up or down, or on or off. We can have certain genes and not have other ones. Yeah. So basically what it means is we can basically test you to understand, okay, everything that's going on in your body right now is creating how you view the world, how you see people, and what you really need in that instance. So it basically just means that when we learn your epigenetic expression, we basically just get a book, and it's like, okay, cool. This is the book of Cody. This is everything that is you. This is exactly what you need to go through. And this is page 1. You need to start here because this is the most important thing for you.
Okay.
It basically just allows us to go, okay, cool. This is who I am, and these are my greatest strengths, and these are the same things that are also the greatest weaknesses, which is the irony of it. Because in that instance, my greatest strength of innovation in that context is also then my greatest weakness in other contexts. And to have a deep sense of clarity and certainty around those things instantly allows you to move forward, because then I can instantly be like, okay, well, I'm just going to delegate all of the other things where people are working on tasks for longer periods of time. And I'm going to partner with people that's their zone of genius. So when we look at that's how we understand and explain what an epigenetic expression is. And that, yes, becomes a core part of how we work with people in the flow formula. It's a core part of how we work with people when we're consulting to 7- and 8-figure companies, if we're working with people in our leadership certification, or if we're working with people in our 12-week Becoming Superhuman program. Every person that goes through those programs starts with getting their epigenetic testing done, so we can have this foundational understanding of who they really are and what they're here to create in this lifetime. And then we work on all of the coaching aspects around that to go, okay, cool. This is what your greatest strength is. Let's pair you up with this person who has the opposite greatest strength so that you guys can work on this project together to allow it to move forward. So that allows us to really understand what the foundations of our epigenetic expression is and how it relates to how we actually work with people. And by utilizing that, it becomes this core aspect of what we look at in the flow formula, because it just creates this fast track to understanding exactly what's going on. We talk about it as just taking all of the guesswork out of it. When you've got the book on who you are, then it instantly just comes so much faster to go, okay, cool, this is the direction that we need to go right now. And this is how you're going to be able to support us in this vision at the fastest rate possible. So that's why we utilize understanding people's epigenetic expressions, which is again a jargon word. It's just understanding who people really are and utilizing their greatest strengths and their greatest weaknesses so that they can create what they're here to create in this lifetime.
Okay, so I have lots of questions, but my first one is going to be, how do you test epigenetic expression? Is it a blood test? Is it a set of questions? Is it combined? How do you do that?
Yeah, so the current process is, normally takes about 60 minutes, and there's a big long questionnaire of different things, like all of the medical history and things like that, as well as measuring your skeleton. So an example of this is the ratio between your index finger and your ring finger will determine certain hormonal profiles in your body, and only specific genes can have that. So in that instance, if your ring finger is longer than your index finger, that means you have more testosterone in your body and you're going to be better at sales. And yes, now every single person is looking at their ring finger, as always.
I just did.
Yeah. And that's just one of like dozens of ratios that we look at. We're looking at wrist, we're looking at the ratio of your palm to middle finger as well, because all of these things, like our skeleton is very much something that becomes fixed in our adult life. And it's this representation of what our gene expression was throughout gestation and throughout our childhood years to that point to become the adult that we are. So it becomes the combination of our genes and the environment over a period of time. And we're looking at both short-term and long-term epigenetic expression. So a shortish term epigenetic expression is like your fingernail. It can have striations on it, it can have spots. All of these things are based on what's going on in your system. If we look at the ratio between those two fingers, that's going to be much longer term. So that's not going to shift as much. And if we do something like drinking water or alcohol or eating food, all of these things slightly shift our epigenetic expression over time. So it becomes really our relationship between the choices that we make every single moment and how that's expressing with our genes and channeling that into what we create. So the process takes about 60 minutes, and that basically what happens is you go through the process, gets put into an AI system where it basically calculates everything and then starts to spit out the most important information for you and what your results are. So when it has that spitting out, I'm sure there's more a technical term, but it's just spitting out the information.
Yep, sounds good.
We categorize people into different categories based on their gene expression. So on a foundational level, we categorize people into 6 different categories. And then once people have a strong understanding of those, and I can talk about those in a second, we then break it down into 360 different categories. And then on a medical level, we break it down into the individual gene expression. And we do this because if we were to instantly go through every single one of the 26,000 genes that someone has, you probably wouldn't understand most of them. So we have different levels of understanding of how we talk about it. So even with me, I won't talk about individual genes very often because most people are not in that conversation. So I'll be talking about the 6 different kind of categories that we talk about, and then the 360 beyond that when people have a foundational understanding of that, because what we're really looking at doing is creating true personalization. And if we have true personalization, there are limitations in how we communicate that to people. So it's just really understanding where people are at. So
awesome.
as part of that, probably the next best thing to share would be like, what are the 6 different categories? That's the most common question that comes up next.
Yep, definitely.
So part of that is the first category that we look at is what we call an activator. And an activator is driven by adrenaline and testosterone, or the hormone ACTH. And what that means is they're going to be much better at sales. They're going to be much better at challenges. That's my section that I'm in. I'm on the board of that section in another one. So that means that I'm really good at sales. And I'm really good at presenting and doing things like that because it lights me up. So that's the activator. Then we move around to the connector, which is my partner, which is driven by oxytocin. And oxytocin is the connection and trust neurotransmitter. And what that does is it allows her to connect with people on an even deeper level, because that is built through that connection. It's very much the belonging neurotransmitter as well. When you connect with someone, you have this oxytocin flood into your system, and that allows you to feel good and connected and belonging in that environment. The next section that we look at is the guardian. And the guardian is driven by prolactin, which is all about nurturing and protecting. So that allows them to nurture and protect, and everyone becomes family to them. by understanding that they just become family. It's because they're protecting and nurturing those people much more. So from there, we move around to the diplomat, which is driven by serotonin. And serotonin is a pleasure-seeking neurotransmitter, and it's predominantly in the gut. More than 70% of it is in the gut, so they have a lot of digestive issues for them. And we can understand how they can get into flow by understanding they're going to seek pleasure, comparative to if we look at the opposite, who we talked about before, of an activator. They're going to avoid, they're going to be avoiding things more than seeking things. They're going to be more avoiding pain, whereas diplomats are seeking pleasure in that instance. So it might be the same behavior, different biological driver underneath it all. So that's the diplomat complete. And then we move around to the sensor, which is driven by vasopressin, which is all about mineral balance. And then we move around to the crusader, which is all about dopamine, which is all about achievement. So when we look at that, every single person has all of these. What we're really looking at is understanding, okay, what is the very first one, the most important one? That if we knock that over, and the metaphor that we use with this is the domino. If we knock over that first domino, is that gonna knock all the other ones over? So if I connect with my partner Jackie, if I knock over the oxytocin aspect, then everything else starts to fall into place. Whereas if she knocks the adrenaline and testosterone over for me, then everything else starts to fall into place. If I focus on the oxytocin, then it just means, okay, well, I'm not getting all of my needs met in that instance. So I'll find some other way to be able to create challenge as part of that. And that can be sometimes in an unresourceful way of doing something like creating drama. And as soon as we understand what people's biology is, we can understand exactly why they do something. And a great example of this is like, even just with exercise, like we'll go around the circle and highlight different reasons why people will exercise. Again, exactly the same behavior, completely different reason for doing it. So in the context of exercise, a activator will do it for challenge, to be able to compete with people. They need variety, they need a lot of challenge, and they'll be able to tolerate much more kind of high intensity stuff with little rest. If we look at that's going to be the core reason why an activator will exercise. Core reason why a connector will exercise is to connect. It's going to be very driven by variety. They don't want to do the same things. They want things thrown in all the time. They don't necessarily want to know the entire plan. It's just like, oh, let's connect. Let's talk to these people. Let's have this interaction. Which becomes part of it. So then we move around to a guardian, which is driven by prolactin. So it's about the nurturing and how they can actually connect with people and actually be part of the family unit that they're actually exercising with, rather than necessarily just be training hardcore all of the time. They'll go hard and then they're just going to rest for a long period of time, and they're just going to be slow and steady and things. And that's going to allow them to get their needs met in that context. So that's the guardian done. We move around to the diplomat next, which is driven by serotonin. So it's going to be about how they can actually feel good from exercise. So if they exercise, it's going to improve their digestive function. That's going to create more serotonin being produced in their body because they're going to feel good. They get more of that, and it becomes this flow-on effect from that. If we go around to a sensor is going to be driven by vasopressin. So for them, it's really about really connecting their mind back with their body. Because they're extremely high functioning in the mind, they need to go utilize exercise to be able to connect their mind and body back together, because otherwise they're just in their head. And then we move around to the crusader, where it's all about achievement. So they're going to be the ones that have heart rate variability trackers. They're tracking everything, and they're doing all these things. They have all of the data because they're looking at achievement, and they're comparing themselves to themselves and wanting to get better and better and better and better over a period of time. So again, we can start to see exactly the same behavior, completely different underlying driver and need that's getting met for them to do that. And as soon as we understand what the underlying need is, the underlying driver, well, then we can actually start to change that behavior. We can actually start to go, okay, cool. Well, if I was to try and motivate an activator comparative to a diplomat in terms of just exercising, well, it's going to be a completely different process. Because I would challenge over here. If I challenge a diplomat, what's probably going to happen is they're probably just going to resist and probably do less. So as soon as we understand these dynamics, we can really understand how we can interact with people, how we can serve people, how we can allow people to live out of their unique innate genius, so they can actually live the life that they're here to live, which is ultimately what it's all about. So
definitely, there's one thing I say to a lot of my clients, and it's a different perspective. So many of us just say, oh, we just need to try harder, but rather than trying harder, how about we try and find a way to make it easier? So that's exactly
Yeah.
what this is helping with. It's helping you identify what's going to make it easier for you to achieve what you want to achieve. That's awesome.
Yeah, 100%. And part of that is really like what flow is all about. It's all about how we can actually just have things be so effortless, which is one of the core parts of flow. It's like if it can be effortless, then what if we could do that in every area of our life? And
Yeah.
like part of the vision of creating this superhuman society is really understanding that right now we're in this I say this in my book as well, we're at this pivotal point in time where all of these meaningless jobs are starting to get phased out by technology. All of these things where someone was just doing this meaningless job, just pressing a button, doing something, just getting phased out by technology. And that creates this perfect opportunity for humanity to start to come from the place of creating for creation's sake, where we can actually have every single person creating from their genius, because that's what's going to create the greatest shift for humanity. It's like if we have 7 billion people working in their genius, creating from their genius, then we can only imagine what that will create for us on a societal level.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's the opportunity that we live in right now, of the shifts in technology on a collective level, and how we can start to bring it back to a foundational level of going, okay, cool. Well, how do I live out of my genius even more?
Yeah. And I think that so many, and I know this is a belief that I had in my head, so many of us believe that, there's that saying that goes around that anything of any value takes hard work, but does it? Or is it just that we have this belief that it does? And if there's an easier way, why don't we take that, so then, we can achieve so much more in our lives? So I'm definitely 100% on board with you. So you mentioned a book before. You wrote a book?
Yeah. We'll get into that in just a second. I just want to riff on just exactly what you were talking about before, of that need to struggle. And it's so rife in Australia as well, because we have this culture of being the good old Aussie battler.
Yes.
And like it's conditioned into us over all of the generations that have gone through, because we're built on a convict society that was first started here. It's like there are certain beliefs that have been passed down to us through our culture, and that's one of them. It's like we've got to work hard for money, we've got to do whatever it takes to be able to make it happen. Then we're going to go through the process that we're conditioned into, of buying a house, going to uni, white picket fence, all of these different things. And you have to struggle every step of the way. And part of that is that's just another blind spot for most people. And it's amazing that you bring that up, because most people, before they start to step into this work, like obviously you've been through, is like that's one of the first things that we really want to work on. Because if we have to make it hard every single time to actually achieve something, it becomes extremely draining for us. And full transparency, that's like one of the things that I hadn't worked through when I had that experience where I was in the car. I was working hard, I had to hustle, I had to get all of these things done to go and do it. And part of it was letting go of that, and that created a dramatic shift in every area of my life. And that was a core part of my growth, and that's a core part of what we work with people as well. So to go from that, as we said right at the start, to go from force to flow. And that's ultimately what it's all about. And as we lead into the question of the book, that's exactly what the book's about as well. It's going through the different components of how we go from force to flow, because forcing is really that struggle. It's that need to make things hard, often when they don't need to be. It's again based on all the societal conditioning that occurs to us, because we go back into that box of needing to be normal, and that creates draining experiences for us. And the more that we can come from our unique innate gifts, the more that we can start to create from that place and begin to create for creation's sake, which is ultimately what it's all about, rather than having to do it for just to get by, or just to buy the next thing that society tells me that I need to buy. It's part of it. And that's exactly what we dive deeper into in the book as well. And it's really starting, the book just outlines the step-by-step process that we go through in the flow formula, the modality to go, okay, cool, this is step one, which is primarily one of the things that we're talking about, our epigenetic expression. This is how we apply it. These are the different examples of it. Lots of kind of stories and case studies and how this applies and how we can start to create that superhuman society, which leads into the name of the company, which is the flow formula, is how we do it. And then it's how do we create, it's creating a superhuman society through flow. So when we can start to understand that all of these things start to come back to how I communicate around my vision for humanity, just starts to fall into place. When you start to see, oh, this part connects up here, this part connects up here, this is the missing piece of the puzzle that we start to look at. And yeah, I have this interesting experience, because so many of my clients tell me that learning the epigenetic expression is just like, it's the missing puzzle piece. They always say this to me, and I love that. And at the same time, I disagree. The way that I see it is, when we learn our epigenetic expression, we really understand what the picture on the box is. Mm-hmm. Because then we understand every individual piece. We can start to go, oh, this piece here, oh, that goes over there. Now that piece makes sense. Now I understand exactly why my childhood was like that. Yeah. Now I understand why I went into this job over that one. That's why I made that decision. Oh, that's why I exercise. We have this deep understanding of why. We understand all of the puzzle pieces then, which creates this deeper sense of connection to what we're here for, to our calling and what we're here to create in this lifetime. And our epigenetic expression is very much, it's the picture on that box, so that we can have that deeper sense of clarity and understanding of what that is. And that really illustrates it perfectly.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so is there anything else that you feel that anybody listening to this episode needs to know right now, or what's the one thing that they need to know?
The one thing that people need to know is every single person has a role in the whole. And what that means is every single person's epigenetic expression is required. Every single person has a specific role in the whole of humanity, of what we're here to create as the evolution of what it is to be human. And part of that is just learning what that is for you. When we understand that we have a role in the whole, we can actually understand, oh, these actually are gifts, even though society may have said they weren't, even though I made them wrong for so many years, even though I made them wrong for most of my life for most people. Yeah. We can start to create this understanding that every single person is in the exact perfect place for where they need to be to become who they need to be.
So from what you just said, what came into my mind was that the whole world is a jigsaw puzzle, and every single one of us is a piece in that jigsaw puzzle, and we're all needed. And sometimes we're just finding the way that we fit into the jigsaw puzzle. That's
100%. And
it's epic. I like that.
Yeah. And it's almost like the inception of it, because it's like we have our own little jigsaw puzzle, which is our piece, and then that becomes part of the bigger jigsaw puzzle at the same time.
Wow.
And when we have it from that perspective, we're like, okay, cool. Well, the greatest thing that I can do is start to learn what my picture is and how I can start to go, okay, cool. The more that I own my greatest strengths and bring those to the world, that more that creates permission for every other person to do the same, which is ultimately what it's all about. It's about how we can create that collective shift on an individual level. And when we can start to do that, everything just becomes effortless for us. And like I can't even comprehend what that would mean for what we would create in the world, because all of the changes that occurred with technology over the last 10, 20 years have created huge shifts. And if we were to only put all of the collective 7 billion puzzle pieces together to be able to create things, imagine what we could create then.
Wow, that's a pretty amazing concept, and I totally love it. I've really loved this conversation with you, Cody. Thank you so much. How can people contact you if they want to have a further conversation with you?
The best way to contact me is just to connect with me on Facebook. You'll probably connect in with one of my team who manages that to just work out like what it is that you're looking at creating in this lifetime and how we can support you in that. And the only other place that I'd recommend checking me out is the flowformulabook.com, where you'll be able to get access to the book as well when it comes out. So that'll be very shortly.
Awesome. And I will put any links from what Cody just said in the show notes, and I will see everybody else on the next episode. Thank you so much for joining us today, Cody. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks. It's been an honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to listening back to it. So thank you.
Thanks. See you, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Remember to check out the show notes, and if you have any comments, feedback or suggestions, I'd love to hear them. If you've received value from this podcast, make sure to subscribe, and I'd love you to rate and review the show. Have a fabulous day.